In November 1922, the stonemason slapped the final layer of wet mortar onto a subterranean vault door, only to hear distinct, heavy thuds pounding against the stone from the inside. The chamber had been completely empty when they started, sealed under 40 feet of solid granite where no living human could survive. What those men witnessed through a tiny breathing hole at night baffled investigators for 80 years, and the classified journal revealed in 2012 changes everything. Arthur Pendleton was not a man given to wild superstitions. He was a veteran stonemason, a practical man who measured his life in mortar, chisel strikes, and square angles. But on the afternoon of November 14, 1922, standing deep within the lower tunnels of an excavation project, Arthur felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. His supervisor, James Sterling, had handed down an urgent order. Vault 4B, a deep storage corridor cut directly into the bedrock, was to be permanently sealed with thick stone. No explanation was given. No delay was permitted. Arthur and his 3 crewmates were instructed to construct a double-thick barrier wall using heavy limestone blocks and fast-setting industrial cement. They were told to work quickly and not to ask questions. As Arthur set the first row of blocks, he noticed something strange. The interior of Vault 4B should have been ice-cold, smelling of damp earth. Instead, every time he leaned near the opening, he felt a warm, humid breeze brushing against his neck. It carried a strange, sweet scent, like dry copper and crushed flowers. By 8 p.m., the wall was nearly finished. Only a single block remained to be fitted at the top center to seal the chamber forever. Arthur picked up his trowel, smoothed a thick layer of grey mortar along the stone edge, and lifted the final heavy block into place. That was when the silence of the underground tunnel was shattered. Thud! 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 The sound was slow, heavy, and unmistakably deliberate. It vibrated directly through the wet mortar, rattling the steel trowel in Arthur's hand. Arthur froze. The 3 other masons stepped back, their faces draining of color in the yellow flicker of the oil lamps. "Is someone still in there?" Arthur called out, his voice echoing down the narrow passage. "Hello? Did someone get trapped?" Silence. Then, a low dragging sound scraped against the inner face of the stone wall, right where the mortar was still soft. Sterling, who had been watching from the top of the tunnel stairs, rushed down. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a frantic panic. He didn't ask if someone was trapped. Instead, he screamed at the men to finish the job and cover the gap immediately. "We can't seal a living person inside!" Arthur yelled back, grabbing a heavy iron chisel. Ignoring Sterling's furious commands, Arthur drove the steel point of his chisel directly into the fresh joint between 2 stone blocks. He hammered it twice until the iron punched through into the darkness beyond, creating a small, 2-inch breathing hole. He expected to hear coughing or crying for help. Instead, the moment the hole opened, the air did something impossible. But the strangest part was still to come. Rather than air blowing out of the pressurized room, the small hole acted like a vacuum. Atmospheric pressure violently inverted. Air was sucked into the opening with a sharp, high-pitched hiss that nearly extinguished their oil lamps. Arthur leaned forward, placing his ear inches from the tiny hole. Out of the dark void came a sound that made the hair on his arms stand up. It wasn't shouting. It was a faint, dry rasping sound, the wet rhythm of shallow human breathing. And then came a whisper. It was soft, close, and impossible to mistake. It spoke a single word through the stone gap. It spoke Arthur's full middle name, a name he had never told anyone on the excavation crew. Terrified, Arthur dropped to his knees and brought the brass lamp up to the hole, peering directly inside. The light pierced the pitch-black space beyond. He expected to see the cramped 4-by-8-foot stone closet they had spent weeks digging out. Instead, the yellow beam stretched out into an infinite, cavernous void. The flat plaster wall that was supposed to form the back of Vault 4B was completely gone. In its place was a vast, unmapped underground hall made of smooth, dark stone that reflected the lamplight like glass. And directly on the dusty floor, less than 3 inches from the inner edge of their newly built wall, were fresh footprints in the dust. Footprints made by bare, elongated feet, leading out from the deep blackness of the hall, stopping right at the wall. Arthur scrambled backward, knocking over his tool bucket. Sterling shoved him aside and looked into the hole himself. When the supervisor pulled his head back, his face was grey with pure terror. Sterling reached into his coat pocket and yanked out the master blueprint of the site. He smoothed the paper against the damp stone wall with trembling hands. The blue ink was clear. Behind Vault 4B lay 40 solid feet of dense granite bedrock, tested by core drills 3 weeks earlier. Beyond that granite was nothing but solid mountain. Geologically and architecturally, that massive hall could not exist. There was nowhere for those footprints to come from. There was no room for any living creature to stand. "Seal it," Sterling whispered, his voice shaking violently. "Fill the hole. Put concrete over the front. We are never coming back down here." Arthur looked back at the hole. The footprints in the dust were over 16 inches long. And the distance between each step was nearly 7 feet. Whatever was standing on the other side of that 2-inch hole was watching them in the dark. If you think that was unsettling, what happened at midnight defies all rational explanation. The crew refused to stay in the tunnel without military backup. Sterling ordered a young local watchman, Thomas Vance, to stand guard outside Vault 4B with a rifle and a kerosene lamp while he went to the surface to contact authorities. Vance was given explicit instructions: stay 10 feet away from the wall. Do not look through the hole. Do not answer if anything speaks. At 11:45 p.m., Arthur returned to the lower corridor alongside 2 armed security officers. The tunnel was dead silent. The single kerosene lamp sat resting on the dirt floor, its flame sputtering low. Thomas Vance's loaded rifle lay discarded on the ground next to it. Vance was gone. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No broken gear. Arthur slowly approached the sealed wall. The wet mortar from earlier in the evening had begun to dry into a pale grey crust. Right at eye level, surrounding the tiny breathing hole, were deep, jagged drag marks pressed into the fresh stone. 5 deep grooves, carved into the mortar from the inside face of the wall, as if 5 long fingers had gripped the wet plaster from within and dragged themselves across the stone, trying to pull the